That stormy night was truly intense. The rain was pouring down in sheets, and the wind howled incessantly, making everything outside blurry under the dim streetlights. I was sitting in the car with my two young sons, 4-year-old Jeremy and 2-year-old Andy, on our way to the synagogue. Both boys were already tired after a long day, but I was determined to finish the remaining tasks for the evening. When we arrived, I stopped the car and looked outside. The heavy raindrops made visibility difficult, and I realized that it wouldn't be possible to bring both children into the synagogue at once without some trouble. I told Jeremy, "Run quickly into the synagogue first, and I'll bring Andy right after you." Jeremy opened the car door and ran straight to the large door. His small figure quickly disappeared into the dense rain. I reached into the back seat to grab Andy, who was still sitting in his car seat. I opened the umbrella, carefully lifted him out of the car, and held his hand as we stepped outside. The cold wind cut through my coat, making me shiver. A few muddy steps on the soaked ground, and all I could think about was getting Andy inside as quickly as possible. At that moment, a strange thought crossed my mind. My wedding ring is touching the umbrella handle. This isn't right. I told myself to let go of the umbrella, but before I could act, a blinding flash of lightning tore through the night sky. The lightning struck directly on the umbrella in my hand. Everything around me seemed to explode in an instant, and I lost all feeling. All sound vanished, all movement ceased, as if time had frozen. Yet I remained fully aware of everything that was happening. The screams of Jeremy and Andy echoed from afar, blending with the sound of rain and thunder. Andy was clutching his ears in pain, as the loud blast had burst his eardrums. Jeremy, against my instructions, ran back out from the synagogue door, trying to pull Andy inside. I was still irritated and angry. Why didn't he listen to me? I told him to stay inside. But then I realized something strange. I was standing and watching them from a distance, while my body lay motionless in the rain. Before my eyes was a sight too unbelievable. I saw myself lying still on the ground, in a puddle of dirty, muddy water. My newly bought shoes were scorched, with the soles completely burned off. But here, right before my eyes, my shoes were still perfectly intact and clean as if nothing had happened. I began to feel confused, unable to comprehend my situation. Looking down at my feet, I saw that I was floating inches above the ground. What is this? Am I dead? I asked myself, but I didn't want to believe it. As I began to accept that this might be real, a light appeared to my right, just above me. That light was so unusual that I couldn't describe it in words. It wasn't just light, but like a living entity, a conscious presence. It didn't speak, but I understood that it wanted me to follow. In that moment, I felt no fear. I simply thought, okay, I'll see what's happening. The light led me to a garden, and it wasn't a normal garden. The plants and flowers were completely different from anything I had ever known on Earth. Their colors were vibrant, sparkling with shades that I could not describe in human language. Each flower bloomed, releasing intense hues into the air, making me feel the overwhelming sense of life and beauty all around me. As I was still captivated by the scenery, a familiar voice echoed in my mind. It was the voice of my grandfather, who had passed away many years ago. His voice carried a distinctive French accent, one I would never forget. He told me to sit on a nearby bench. "Sit down, child," his warm and firm voice resounded in my mind. The bench appeared handcrafted, incredibly intricate and beautiful. As I sat down, it immediately molded itself to my body, adapting to my every curve, as if it had been custom-made just for me. I was still in awe of this wonder when my grandfather sat down next to me. However, I couldn't turn to look at him, and a part of me didn't dare to. I was afraid of what I might see if I looked at him. Someone who had been gone for so long. He began talking to me, but not with words. Everything played out in my mind, as if all his answers were directly transmitted into my thoughts without a single sound being uttered. It all felt so natural, as if I had been here before. A sense of familiarity, yet strangeness enveloped me. I wasn't sure if this was a dream or another reality. I couldn't ask much, because so many questions were crowding my mind. What remained was a feeling of disorientation, but I knew I was somewhere beyond the physical world. A place where peace and unconditional love existed, surpassing any emotion I had ever known on earth. Sitting on the bench that had molded itself to my body, I felt the warm presence of my grandfather beside me. Although I didn't look directly at him, I could hear his deep, comforting voice clearly in my mind. He no longer spoke with his distinctive French accent, but his thoughts flowed into my head with clarity and ease. It was as though he was communicating with me in a way that transcended ordinary words. He began answering questions I had never spoken aloud. I realized that every thought in my mind had already been known to him. He explained to me that the place I was in wasn't like Earth. Each person who arrived here would see something different, unique to them. For me, it was a vibrant garden filled with flowers, but for others, it could be something entirely different. He said that heaven wasn't a fixed place, but a reflection of what lay deep within each person's heart and soul. And what about the others? What are they seeing? I couldn't help but ask, curious. We are all in the same place, he replied, but what they see is not a garden. Some may be on a beach or in another space where they feel most at peace. Heaven is personalized for each individual. His voice continued to resonate in my mind, without him needing to open his mouth. As I listened to this, my curiosity grew even stronger. What would happen next? Could he answer every question I had? My mind was filled with thousands of thoughts. Where do we really go after we die? Why am I here? And what happens if I don't go back? He patiently answered each question with an extraordinary calmness. You can stay here if you want to, or you can choose to return, but if you stay, you will have to cross those mountains. He pointed to the horizon, where majestic mountains stretched far into the distance. Once you cross, you cannot go back. I gazed toward the horizon, seeing the mountains that seemed distant and mysterious. I couldn't know what lay beyond them, but the feeling of permanence and irreversibility that came with that decision made me hesitate. I wasn't ready to give up the world I had lived in. There was still too much left to do, and the thought of leaving my loved ones weighed heavily on me. As I was still lost in these thoughts, my grandfather said to me, "You will have another child, a daughter. She has already chosen you, and you will meet her if you decide to return." I stopped in my tracks. "A daughter? How do you know that?" He smiled, saying that the child had chosen me and my husband to be her parents. At that moment, I felt a strange bond with the unborn child. The idea that she had chosen me gave me a strength I hadn't felt before. If I didn't return, would she choose someone else to be her parents? "Yes," he answered. "If you don't go back, she will find another family. But she has chosen you, and that means she trusts you. But the decision is yours." My heart was overwhelmed with emotion. From that moment, I knew I had to return. I couldn't miss the chance to meet this daughter, the one who had chosen me. Although this world offered me peace and unconditional love, I couldn't abandon what was waiting for me in the other world. I wanted to return to meet my child, to watch her grow up, and to be part of her life. As soon as I made that decision, my grandfather continued to tell me about future events that I could never have imagined. He said that my marriage would end in divorce. This shocked me, as at that point, my husband and I had been married for 8 years and were very happy. That can't be, I thought. We're doing fine. There's no reason to think about divorce. But he told me that it would happen, whether I believed it or not. And indeed, 9 years later, we did divorce. A mix of astonishment and worry filled my heart as he told me these things, but at the same time, I knew he wasn't lying. You will go through many difficulties, but in the end, You will overcome them. He continued. You will have many more experiences that you cannot predict. He also mentioned a major sporting event that I didn't care about, the upcoming Super Bowl, and said that George H.W. Bush would win the presidential election. At that time, I didn't understand why he was telling me these things, as I had no interest in politics or sports. But he explained that when these events occurred, they would help trigger my memories of this encounter. The memories of this experience will fade when you return, he said. But when you see those events, it will bring everything back to you. By this point, I had no more doubts about my decision. I knew that I would return to the other world, even though the price to pay would be pain and hardship. My grandfather had warned me that returning to my body would be very painful, as my soul had expanded and my body had been severely injured by the lightning strike. He said he would help me, but I had to be ready to face the challenges ahead. Before I returned, he added that once I was back, I would begin to experience strange dreams. These dreams would reveal to me catastrophic events, disasters that I would be powerless to avoid. But he reassured me that this was part of the path I had to walk, and that I would have to learn to accept them. His warning echoed in my mind as he began compressing my soul back into my body. I felt an overwhelming pressure, as though every cell in my body was being squeezed tightly. The pain spread throughout my being, as if an invisible force was weighing down on every part of me. All sensations became more intense than ever before. And then suddenly, I opened my eyes. The rain was still falling, and my body lay on the cold, wet ground. Only a few minutes had passed, yet I felt as though I had been on a journey that lasted 2 weeks. People were just beginning to come outside to help me, but I knew that I had returned from a place unlike anything else in this world. I had returned. The first sensation when I opened my eyes was the excruciating pain coursing through my body. The cold rain soaked me to the bone, but the pain from the lightning burns made everything else fade away. Each breath felt like a massive effort, as I had to fight to take in even the smallest amount of air. People around me rushed outside to help, pulling me up and quickly bringing me into the synagogue. I could clearly feel the chaos, the worried glances, and the frantic shouts. But for me, everything felt distant and blurred, as I was still lost in the memories of the magical garden and my conversation with my grandfather. When my body was brought to the hospital, I endured many painful hours of treatment. The severe burns on my legs left me unable to move, forcing me to remain bedridden for months. The physical pain was relentless, but the emotional pain was even greater. I no longer felt like the person I used to be. The experience from the other side had profoundly changed my perception of life, of this world, and of myself. But I didn't know how to confront these changes. My husband, who had always loved and cared for me, also sensed this transformation. He realized that I was no longer the wife he had known. An invisible distance began to grow between us, and despite our efforts, our marriage couldn't return to what it once was. My grandfather's prophecy about the divorce suddenly came to mind. I hadn't believed it at the time, but now everything was starting to make sense. As my body gradually recovered, I began to experience strange dreams. These weren't ordinary dreams. They carried a terrifying realism. Every night, when I closed my eyes, I was pulled into catastrophic scenes. Plane crashes, earthquakes, and tsunamis constantly appeared in my dreams, and they weren't vague images. Every detail was eerily precise. Flight numbers, the number of people on board, and even the exact location of the crash. At first, I thought these were just imaginary nightmares. But then one night, I dreamed of a plane crash. In the dream, I saw the plane plunge into the sea, and I clearly heard the flight number, the number of passengers, and even the exact location of the crash. When I woke up, I couldn't shake the dream from my mind, so I told my husband about it. He was shocked, but didn't believe it. I wasn't entirely sure either, until 2 days later when news of the crash appeared on television, and every detail matched my dream. I started to wonder, why were these dreams coming to me? What was I supposed to do with them? Could I stop these tragedies before they happened? But the answer wasn't simple. I couldn't report them to the authorities or anyone else because if they didn't happen, I would be seen as crazy. But if they did happen and I did nothing, would I be responsible? The dreams kept coming, one by one, like pieces of a horrific puzzle that I couldn't control. I started writing down each dream. I sent emails to myself, marking the date and time of every disaster I saw in my sleep. I thought that by doing this, I could hold on to my sanity, to determine whether these events were real or just products of my imagination. But not all of the dreams came true. Some events from my dreams never happened, or at least weren't reported in the news. This made me feel like I was living in two parallel worlds. One where I had the ability to predict the future, and another where I couldn't control anything. When I started writing a book with Jeff Capel, a friend and colleague, he had a university student research and compare my dreams with actual events. Many of my dreams matched real-life disasters, but there were also dreams that didn't align with any reported events. This made me question, were there events that happened but weren't reported, or did they only exist in my mind? One of the most haunting dreams I had wasn't included in the first book, but I decided to recount it in the second one. It was about a plane crash, but this time I wasn't just an observer from afar. I found myself sitting on the plane, talking to a woman. She introduced me to her daughter, a young girl sitting next to her. The atmosphere in the dream was strange, like we were at a cocktail party, but I knew that a crash was imminent. As the plane began to fall, the woman panicked, grabbing my hand and begging me to take her daughter with me. "Please, take my daughter. Find my husband. Take her to him," she pleaded, and I could feel the utter desperation in her voice. There was nothing I could do to save them. Everything happened too quickly, and when the plane hit the ground, I saw souls rising from the wreckage, floating into the air like ghosts. When I woke up, I knew this dream was more than just a dream. It carried specific details, names, flight numbers, and vivid images that were too real to be just imagination. I immediately sent myself an email, recording every detail I could remember. And sure enough, 3 days later, when the passenger manifest from the crashed flight was released, I saw the names of the woman and her daughter on the list. I felt as though I was trapped between two worlds, the world of reality and the world of prophetic dreams. These dreams didn't stop there. After I began publicly sharing my near-death experience, the frequency of the dreams started to decrease. Perhaps telling my story was the way the universe demanded that I fulfill my purpose, as though I was carrying out a mission I hadn't chosen but had been destined to complete. I no longer fear death, because I know that our consciousness will survive after our bodies die. We will continue to exist, not in physical form, but in another realm, where each person will experience it in their own way. But even though I don't fear death, I still fear pain. Life on Earth isn't easy, and we deserve praise for bravely facing these challenges. In the end, I realized this: what we do in this life will affect what we experience after death. Life is not just a random journey, but a series of decisions and actions, each contributing to the grand picture of our lives, both before and after we leave this world.